Hi, I'm Ken Coleman, and this is not a sponsored video. Now, please excuse me while I gush about saving hope. Have you heard of the show? I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't. I didn't know it was a show until last summer. I saw it mentioned on Ion, and I was like, oh, sounds like fun. It's a medical drama about a medium, and the medium is able to communicate with spirits that are on the way out, teetering right along the wire of mortality, and sometimes those who have just passed. And then I started realizing that there are some familiar names. The lead surgeon, it's about a whole surgical unit. The lead surgeon, and not the medium, is Alex Reed. She is played by Erica Durrance, who had played Lois in Smallville. And this is before the Crisis on Infinite Earths for the Arrowverse, where Durrance came back as Lois. And the other big star is the Daniel from SG-1. He plays Charlie, the orthosurgeon, who through much of season 1 is in a coma, and that's where he starts interacting and speaking with these spirits. And after he eventually comes out, spoilers, after he eventually starts coming out, he's able to use that rapport, that link with them, to help to better solve cases. Like if there's something wrong and it's that patient's gut feeling, no physiological pun intended, they're able to communicate with that spirit and get an idea right in the OR what's going on. Another great doctor was Hussein Majhavi's portrayal of Dr. Shahir. Aside from Girl Meets World, Sparkle Minkus, I have never seen such a dedicated performance in portraying someone who is, in quotes, a diagnosed Aspie. The Majhavi, the actor, he had worked with a Toronto-based organization to help people on the autistic spectrum to get a better understanding of how to portray a character on the spectrum. And I really enjoyed not only his dedication and how well he played the role, but the fact that his Aspie character was just treated as part of the ensemble cast. Sometimes when you have a show that is just about an Aspie, it tends to make what makes the Aspie so different the highlight of the show. And then it becomes sort of a caricature. It is building on the most extreme features that make them stand out. When if you've met one Aspie, you've met one Aspie. That's a little bit of column A, column B, column C of the different symptoms. So another great character was Maggie, an OBGYN who found out that she was LGBTQ by falling in love with another doc. And in this second doc's story, multiple seasons, she went through this issue of religion, and not so much in the very conservative Christian perspective, but an Orthodox Jewish background, in how that did not always fit into her struggles with her own sexual identity. And I thought that it was a very bold, very detailed, and very careful. Not careful in a bad way, but They took their time and they were very understanding in how to approach such a not well covered subject, something that you don't find in that many shows. It's being a very Canadian show, and part of why I didn't know what Saving Hope was that it was only televised in the States for one season. And then NBC was like, we don't want you, and Saving Hope became as Canadian as it wanted. And that's how I learned terms like keener. Being so Canadian, it also covered subjects like hockey and some things that you consider stereotypical. One of the pro athletes, I don't think that it was an actual pro athlete guesting, but a character playing a pro athlete. The athlete was a pro hockey player. And they were dealing with the subject of CTE, which is very relevant in today's sports, especially in sports such as ice hockey, which is so physical. And you could empathize both with the doctor, with the patient, and how in the patient's love life, the patient's significant other. The patient was an enforcer. And coming up through the leagues, he was told that you're either known for finesse or brute force, and that his strength wasn't finesse. This guy had suffered brain injury just to the point where he'd have to retire if the doctor had fully diagnosed him. And so he was trying to prevent that from ever being done, until the surgeon showed that he was going to be in danger nonetheless, diagnosis or not. Fact is a fact, no matter if it's put on paper or not. And by the end, he calls it a career. But you empathize both with the doctor, both with the hockey player, and his significant other, and you're understanding just how complex that situation must be. Another great story arc, another great story. Every single episode usually involved one spirit on the brink, and that's who Charlie was dealing with. And sometimes there were other mediums involved. Another story was involving a transgender character, a transgender patient. And it was an MTF. And the patient had just started transitioning. The patient was a football coach, what we would call in the States high school level. And there was an on-the-field accident, which she did not make it through. And for all ways that the patient was presenting, you would think that it was like 40s, 50s in age, male, adult, and father of one of the players. And who Charlie is seeing in the middle of the hospital is this apparition of a beautiful woman, and she is just gushing about herself, astounded by how beautiful she is in her reflection. And it's through most of the episode that he's realizing that that is the football coach in her truest form. And being able to understand this, but for reasons of, I'm guessing, a Canadian version of HIPAA, either that or just common courtesy, professional courtesy. I'm not too sure on Canadian healthcare privacy, patient information law. But he wasn't able to just go outright and tell the patient's son. That also, in ways, isn't the surgeon's secret to keep. And it turned out the son was already getting the drift of what was going on, and he was like, those weren't steroids that my dad was taking, were they? And that was just another shining example of how how much care the creators of Saving Hope put into presenting different types of stories. It reminded me in ways of ER. ER crossed with Grey's because ER was dealing with emergency medicine. Grey's was in surgery. And it was so in-depth and procedural that it had a lot of ER in it for me. It reminded me of Michael Crichton's book, Five Patients, which ER was based off of. Five patients would go into very in-depth medical fields and practices because he was a student at Harvard Med. The last episode that I'd like to mention, and I'm running high on time, is that this was just as the pandemic was starting to really make itself known in North America this year. I was watching an episode about a coronavirus, and they weren't giving a specification on the type of virus that they were dealing with. And at that point, it was just on a level of assumption because some type of airborne virus had come in through a flight attendant from abroad. And they were already zeroing in on the likelihood of it being a coronavirus. The flight attendant was brought into this hospital where these surgeons all work. And all of a sudden you had to quarantine that whole hospital. Some of the lead characters, some of the stars were outside of this quarantine zone. And it was a few years before, 2020. And I had just happened to come across it on my DVR as I was making my way through the episode list. And it was just quite the coincidence to see something that close to what I was perceiving in the hospital where I work. And I was asking one of my friends in an ID department, an infectious disease department, and she was like, yeah, that's similar in protocol. A difference was that the ID doc in Saving Grace, in Saving Hope, who was trying to ID the virus, in the end, it turned out to not be a coronavirus in their case. And he was a little bummed out about that. He didn't get to work on such an exciting, exotic virus, but exotic nonetheless. And the episode ended right short of him being able to further identify what the virus was. So once again, this episode of Excuse Me While I Gush is not sponsored, but I'd suggest to any of you, that if you like ER, sort of if you like Grey's, it's a little less soapy, in ways less soapy than Grey's. A lot less death toll. A lot less of a death toll. But if you're a really big fan of ER, I'd strongly suggest the show. And Saving Hope, last I checked on the TV guide, it can be found on ION. And I'm not too sure where else in other broadcast markets through the world. Thank you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Leave your comments below if you enjoyed Saving Hope as much as me. If we can gush together. If you have suggestions on other shows for me to check out. And subscribe if you'd like to see more of this content. Thank you. My name is Ken Coleman, and have a good night.